walk progress, so I'll turn it over to Mayor Mike, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. And then we'll have a quick Q&A, or we'll have a Q&A session. And we're going to ask people to raise their hands, and then Emily and I will take responsibility for calling on people, so we'll minimize the chaos. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. 15 minutes is a long time for you to hear me talk, but I want to give you a little bit of background. Some of you have known me all my life. Others are relatively new to the community. So from a public perspective, I began as a volunteer working for the town of East Hampton on the Conservation Commission in '77. And that came about because of a relationship I had with a selectman at the time, Ted Borikowski, who was a retired police officer and a neighbor. And I worked in his store, did his payroll and taxes, and avid hunter and fisherman, and he said, "Boy, Mike, you'd really like the Conservation Commission. It's all about hunting and fishing." Well, clearly it wasn't, but I got kind of the bug for serving my community then, and shortly thereafter became a member of the town meeting, served for 19 years as a town meeting member, 2 terms plus the first year of a third term as a member of the Board of Selectmen. And I've kind of a long history about being involved in the community. As chairman of the Conservation Commission, we tended to make a few enemies in the development community. I was actually not reappointed to the Conservation Commission after about 5 years as chair. So I got picked up by the Hampshire County Conservation Trust and ended up chairing a state conservation commission for 5 years until I came back to service in the community as a member of the Board of Selectmen and just couldn't find time to do both of those jobs. Lived here all my life, live in the house that I grew up in, bought it from my mom in 1983, and as my wife tells me, I eat, sleep, and breathe and sleep. So I've always been concerned about where we were going and what we were doing. I probably authored $2 or $3 million worth of grants at this point. In this business, you need to be 8 to 12 years out. You need to be thinking that far down the road because things go very slowly. So in the 80s, we were talking about protecting the water supply. In the early 80s, it took us till the 90s to do that. In the early 90s, we were talking about, well, in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, we were talking about how do we reuse these mills. It took us till 1995 to write the laws that we currently operate under that made these mills successful. The individuals who invested here are the people that took the risk. But the city put zoning law together that allowed them to take a less of a risk. No industry is going to reuse these old mill buildings. They don't fit the modern industrial practices. Industrial practices today are more reflective of the Tube Products building or across the street at Chem Metal or the Adhesive Coatings Company. Single story, very flat on a slab. It's easier, production runs much faster, no up and down. Now, under our current zoning that was written now 16, 17 years ago, the mills are successful because we can do mixed use here. There are still issues with building codes and fire codes, and those are regulations that locally we can't change, but we try to work through them. I joined the Board of Selectmen because in 1986 there was a charter change, and that charter change merged 2 independent elected boards that refused to talk to each other. So we had a Board of Public Works that met in what is now Jean-Pierre Zelouse Gallery, and we had a Board of Selectmen that met in what is now Flywheel's office. And they met on the same night and they wouldn't go across the hall. They refused to talk to each other. There was a planner employed by the Board of Public Works that was doing some work here on Pleasant Street. It was a streetscape improvement, but it also had storefront work, improving access to buildings, that sort of thing. Well, there was an argument between the Selectmen and the Board of Public Works about using this planner's position for anything but roads. And so the board finally ordered the planner not to work on the rest of the grant, and we ended up getting blackballed. And we were actually blackballed for grants until my second year as mayor. And then the valve opened up again, and we've been getting grants again. So I ran for the Board of Selectmen to try to salvage that government, and it didn't work. Essentially, these 2 bodies that wouldn't talk to each other were put together as one, and all of their day-to-day authority was taken away. So the Board of Public Works would go to road jobs and order the staff around because they were the Board of Public Works. They had that policy authority. And the selectmen would talk to department heads, police, fire, council on aging, and give them orders. And so they really had a lot of day-to-day authority. There was no central management. It was a bunch of fiefdoms. That changed under the new charter, which I thought was going to be a great addition to the community. But unfortunately, the politics made it fail. We ended up fighting amongst ourselves more than cooperating to getting anything done. It took about 2 years to figure out that that wasn't going to work. And luckily, there was a trigger in that charter to require the voters to revisit it. And the voters did revisit it. They created what we have for our government today. And to be honest, I was sitting on the Board of Selectmen, and Debbie and I were considering, what our position was on the new charter, and not really thinking about taking a job as mayor. It had not been in our thought process. We hadn't had a mayor. We had hired 3 or 4 town administrators over time between 85 and 95. But it just seemed like, okay, let's see who's going to be running. We did see who was running and decided that in order to be successful, there needed to be a good foundation, and that probably the best shot at laying that foundation was someone with my background and my experience. And I think that was pretty successful. I'm really proud of where we are today. I don't know that it's only that it would not have been successful if someone else got elected. I certainly can't say that because there were some talented people running. But we were able to build a coalition around the idea that we should put East Hampton first. And that has been the motto, the champion, all through this time. It's always what's in our best interest, not what's in any particular individual's best interest, or how it might look on a resume, or whether I can cut a ribbon. And although I hear my detractors saying how important it is for me to be at events where I can get pictures and ribbon cuttings, I really don't flock to that. That's really not my interest. But you need to be careful in races because you should be talking to people who put their capacity on the line and tell you how good they're going to do, not how bad somebody else is doing. Because when someone only has things to say about how bad somebody else is doing, then you really don't have anything to say. You can detract all you want, but if you can't find the positives, you're never going to be successful. And so I've always lived with the idea that even the folks that I disagree with on a lot of things, I agree with them on some things. When we wrote the Aquifer Protection Zoning bylaws, it was a very different place in East Hampton. Some of you probably remember, this was not a community that was sensitive to the environment or sensitive to maintaining open space or really concerned much about what we do. It was a community that was concerned a lot about profit. How much money can we make if we develop this parcel? How much, how many houses can we fit on this farm field? And we lost a lot of agriculture over the years. We've saved a lot of land over the last 15 years. And that was deliberate. It continues to be deliberate. We're always looking for opportunities to save sensitive property. We're a very small community, 14 square miles. Our density is greater than 1,000 people per square mile. We're considered a high-density community because of it. So we don't look like a Holyoke, but we're in this, from a density perspective, we're in the same group of communities because of this fact that we're such a small place. And so being a small place, what is here is all important. And we've got to figure out how to use what we have for resources for all of our good. And it can't just be protected and it can't just be developed. It has to be some sort of middle ground. There has to be an opportunity for all of the needs and the interests of the community to be served, while still trying to focus on what are the most important pieces to hit. And so we do these things, and I'm sure many of you have seen this. This is the master plan, and I know that your group used this significantly to try to understand where we were going with that particular housing project and the like. It is a plan, and we've done 4 of them while I've been around in some sort of a elected position here in the community. And they've all built on the old ones and gathered people in to talk about what should be new. And as a matter of fact, this one was the basis of several charrettes that began in 2003, many of them held here, to try to get all of the community involved. The concerted effort that happened to produce this 2008 one was a wonderful effort amongst a lot of people, and it put out an awful lot of ideas and a lot of things we should be doing moving forward. And not to a page, but in general, we follow the plan as best we can, given what we have to work with and how we move forward. Which sort of brings us to a part of what I wanted to talk about, which was finances. I sign every purchase order in the community, and it's not because I think I need to watch what everybody's doing, but it's the way you understand what the community itself is doing. If you follow the money, you'll follow what your initiatives are. You're able to keep up on, are we doing this project or that project? Is there enough vaccine for the flu shots that are coming up? Has it been ordered? And you can see a lot of that because we require purchase orders before anyone places an order. So you can get a look at what the departments are planning 30, 60 days in advance. And it's helpful to be able to try to coordinate things. Before we were a city, we were really a community of little fiefdoms. We had departments that wouldn't work very closely with other departments. We had people that thought that their priorities had to be higher than any other priority in the community. And we try to push that back. I mean, every department needs to be strong. Every department needs to argue and lobby for what they need. But at the end of the day, we all need to agree that we're going to move forward as a single cohesive unit and not in a lot of different directions. The biggest wedge that ever existed in my memory under the town form of government was this idea that education takes an overly large piece of the budget. And I've not subscribed to that, but I do recognize that we needed to address that in some way so that all the departments were comfortable that they weren't somehow being overlooked. When I became mayor, we spent about 55 to 58% of the budget on education. That turned out, in my mind, to not have been enough, and I came to that conclusion after 19 years of being a town meeting member and voting on every budget, writing budgets for the departments that I was involved in, writing budgets for grants. But there needed to be some sort of a leveling method, a method where I could get other department heads to be comfortable with the idea that everyone gets a priority. And so we looked together as a group of departments in the community at what the targets ought to be. And we ended up with a target for education at about 2/3 of what we have for available revenue. We were able to get to that in about 4 years, and we've stayed there. It doesn't mean that the schools have been overly funded, and as a matter of fact, when you base your targets on what you have to spend, everyone hurts in lean years. And we've had lean years since 2003. 2003 was the beginning of a dismantling of what supports local government at the state level. There are a whole host of programs that have been eliminated since 2003 that used to bring money to the community. The ones that come to mind just off the top of my head are busing. Used to be that the state would provide a reimbursement for school transportation to all school districts, whether they were regional or local. That amounted to about $230,000 for East Hampton. When they pulled that in 2003 or 2004, it had a big effect on kids getting to school because the school department couldn't replace that money. There wasn't new money to backfill that $200,000, and so you started to see busing being reduced here in East Hampton. To now where it is I believe we bus just to the state standard, nothing beyond. I think we have a fill the bus program that gets children on buses that have room for them, provided that it can be fair and affects everyone in the community the same way. And I think the school committee's done a good job on that. But we've been able to assure the other departments that that's how we're going to share the pie moving forward. And that's led to a lot of great cooperation. We have great department heads. We have wonderful staff here. We work together well. We don't always agree, and ultimately the mayor's office has to make that decision. I'm gratified to have been reelected to this position for 7 times. I do want to be reelected for an 8th term. We have some work that's still unfinished. I point to the high school because I think that is the jewel of what's happening today, but it's not the only thing that has to be completed. We do need to transition from what I consider a staff type mayor to someone who maybe isn't quite that. There's no one who does what I do in the valley the way that I do it.
Sorry to interrupt.
It's
I know
okay.
a lot of people have questions.
Sure.
So if we could wrap it up in another minute or so, you have any final thoughts, or should? Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. I believe I represent the best of the 2 candidates that are here, that I can do the best for the community, that I offer the right kind of experience, the right kind of drive, and the right kind of understanding of what's ahead of us. The budgeting is so important. The ability to work with the diverse group of people that we work with and to be able to get them to agree to move forward in a way that's beneficial and lifts everyone are attributes that no one else holds. And my opponent is a nice guy. I think he would have made a great city councilor.